Iran will face strict limitations on its program, and Iran has also agreed to the most robust and intrusive inspections and transparency regime ever negotiated for any nuclear program in history.
You know, there's a cute cartoon circulating on the internet where a SWAT team approaches the house of a drug dealer and pounds on the door and says, "We've got a warrant to search your house." And the drug dealer opens the door and says, "Oh my gosh, are you coming in now?" And the policeman in front of the squad says, no, I'll be back in between 3 and 5 weeks. We're not kidding around. We're going to search your entire house in 3 to 5 weeks. That's as silly as what's happening here. Except he's not looking for drugs. He's looking for weapons that could end the world as we now know it. 4, sanctions. You might recall that President Obama said significant sanctions would be lifted if and only if Iran came clean. And coming clean meant disclosure of their past weapons program, their violations of IAEA and UN sanctions, where the nuclear weapon sites were, where the uranium was, where were the centrifuges, how many there were, what was going on in the secret sites, and where were the sites we didn't know about. Remember all of that? Well, guess what? Iran said no, and Obama and Kerry just asked, well, what would you agree to? And what Iran said is, if we promise to be different, in other words, all the lying and cheating we've done for decades is going to end. If we promise to be good citizens and follow your deal, will you give us $150 billion up front on the first day? And crazy as it may sound, Obama said yes. The money moves across and the sanctions are gone. And oh, by the way, remember the promise that sanctions will snap back if they ever violate? That's impossible. The UN has already said sanctions wouldn't come back in under a couple of years, and the European Union said they won't come back, and China and Russia said they won't come back. So maybe if the United States decided to put back sanctions in a year or 2 or 3, maybe they could, but the rest of the world has already said no. So once the sanctions are gone, they're gone, and the money, over $150 billion on the first day and possibly as much as $1 trillion over the next decade, will start flowing into Iran. Number 5, duration. What was originally promised was an infinitely long, with no expiration, blocking of Iran's path to a bomb. If you remember the promise, they will never, ever have a path to the bomb. As Prime Minister Netanyahu explained to Congress and has been very loud in proclaiming ever since, not only does this deal not preclude Iran from getting a bomb, it virtually guarantees they will have nuclear weapons sometime between the 8th and the 15th year after this is instituted, and that's if their cheating is minimally invasive. Number 6, elimination of the nuclear program. What was supposed to happen is all of the enriched uranium that they've created over the last 15 to 20 years secretly was going to be exported, probably to Russia, and kept permanently. All the centrifuges were going to be shut down, and they would literally have no nuclear program. Now, Iran's going to give up the old centrifuges, which they were shutting down anyway because they're like Model Ts, and the super duper high efficiency ones, which by the way are all on the military bases, which by the way are not going to be inspectable, are all staying in place. So the nuclear program and the nuclear sites and the nuclear infrastructure stays in place throughout Iran without being shut down at all. In other words, they're guaranteed to have a supportive nuclear program permanently going forward. Number 7, we all remember Americans that have been killed by terrorist proxies funded, trained, and supported by Iran around the world. No one knows exactly how many, but it might be as many as several thousand. The families of those survivors have sued Iran and received judgments in U.S. courts under U.S. law years ago. And they've been trying for years and years to get at the money that the United States has frozen. Recently, a new injunction was filed in the Southern District of New York with the intention of getting at some of those billions of dollars.
To this now, there is new opposition to the nuclear deal with Iran, a group of terror victims filing a lawsuit to stop the government from returning overseas bank accounts to Tehran.
Astoundingly, the United States is opposing that injunction because they want, the United States government being they, wants all that money to go to Iran and not to the victims of Iranian-sponsored terrorism that's occurred over the last 2 decades. So it's the United States and Iran versus the descendants of Americans killed by Iran terror. It's shocking. Number 8, Americans oppose the JCPOA, most recent polls by at least 2-to-1 or 2.5-to-1. The more Americans learn about the deal, the more shocked they become, the more disgusted they become, and the more vehement they become in their opposition to approval of the deal. A majority of Congress on both sides, in both the House and the Senate, have already come out against the deal. And ironically, because of the way this deal is going to be approved legislatively, it seems to me to be a treaty, but it's not being approved as if it were a treaty. Obama can veto the disapproval of his deal, and unless both sides of the Congress can muster a 2/3 majority and make it veto-proof, Obama will implement the deal over the objections of the American people and the objections of both houses of Congress, even though most Americans think it's crazy to do this deal. And yet, for some inexplicable reason, the president is calling on every possible favor to pressure every member of Congress to vote to support him on the JCPOA.